Yo, Chiefs fans, today is the wonderful, magical, beautiful day where I finally tell you what my wide receiver projections are. What are my predictions for the Chiefs wide receiver groupings? How do I think they're going to fare statistically? This is an incredibly difficult group to predict. There's so many variables. We're going to get through the predictions, and I think that everyone is going to hate me. I'm going to get a lot of hate in the comments for my predictions. So make sure that you tell me where I'm wrong. I want to hear it. I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for this. I might get a tiny little sliver of love, but my predictions, based on all the information that I gained throughout the offseason and the last several videos, the work we did, I do not think I'm going to make very many friends with these. So you have been warned um, with these predictions. But I won't waste too much time. It's going to be a short video today. We're just going to walk through the predictions. This is Gary with Gridiron Lines. Thanks for coming on to RGR Football. If you haven't done so already, make sure that you like this video and subscribe to RGR Football. We're trying to get to 30,000 subscribers, and maybe somewhere along the way, I'm going to try to convince Ryan to throw a party for us if we get there. So I just need to work on Ryan on that for a bit. But if you look at the calculator on screen, you see this number, 2,800. Well, what the heck does that number mean, and why the heck is there a calculator on the screen? Oh, I'll explain this to you. So, Patrick Mahomes, on average, whenever he's been starting in the NFL, throws for about 2,800 yards to the wide receiver position group. That means the other 2,200 yards that he throws on average every year go to the tight ends or the running backs. On average, Mahomes throws for a freakish 5,000 yards per year. That's just incredible. We talked about that last video. And he throws for 40 touchdowns on average. So this is just insane. These are insane numbers. How lucky are we as Chiefs fans to have Patrick Mahomes? So I knew going into this season, I would want to use about 2,800 yards to bucket for the wide receiver groups to make their projections for how they'll fare in 2023. Why is this such a hard group to predict? Because there's so many variables. There's so many unknowns. One of the easiest ways to go about predicting things is to go with what you know. And the Chiefs have so many young wide receivers, some wide receivers who have not even played a single snap in the NFL, wide receivers who came off other teams, wide receivers with injury history. It's just crazy. So this is an extremely challenging problem, and I'm taking it on, and I'm probably going to get hated for it, and I don't care about that. I'm just going to put my ideas out there and what I think is right, and we'll go from there. Oh, and by the way, the next video I plan on doing, we're going to see how my predictions fared last year. So next video, you'll be able to see, okay, well, maybe we can trust this guy a little bit, or this guy's an idiot. I'm not sure yet. We'll find out in next week's video, but let's get to the predictions. So starting with what we know. And what we know is Marquez valdes-scantling. Why do I say we know Marquez valdes-scantling? Well, when you make a prediction like this with a ton of unknowns, you want to start with what you do know. And I think at this point in time in Marquez valdes-scantling's career, we have an idea of who he is and what he can do. He's averaged about 600 yards per year that he's been in the NFL. Last year, he had 687 yards and 2 touchdowns with the Chiefs. And so I think this is probably the easiest player to predict in terms of production. And I'm saying that Marquez valdes-scantling, I'm going to predict that he has 650 yards receiving and 4 touchdowns next season. He only had 2 touchdowns with the Chiefs. I think that number goes up because I think he and Patrick Mahomes kind of found a bit of a groove in the red zone heading down the stretch of the season, particularly in the playoffs. That one catch he made versus the Bengals was honestly one of the most clutch plays I think the Chiefs had all of last year. So I love Marquez valdes-scantling. I love what he brings to this team. He brings an element of length as well as speed. And he's a good piece for this Chiefs offense. I just don't see him as a 1,000-yard receiver or number one guy. he kind of fills in that Sammy Watkins role a bit. So Marquez Valdes-Scantling, 650 yards and 4 touchdowns. So I'm going to subtract 650 from our 2,800. Now Patrick Mahomes is left with 2,150 yards to throw to the rest of the wide receivers. Moving on to the next player, and this is a complete unknown, Kadarius Toney. Now, Kadarius Toney, this is where people are probably going to want to kill me. So in last week's video, I talked about how Kadarius Toney didn't average very many yards per game for the Chiefs receiving. In fact, in the 6 or 7 games that he played with the Chiefs last year during the regular season, he only accrued 171 yards receiving. And that averaged to be around, 25-ish, I think, yards per game. And so what about that makes me think that Kadarius Toney is going to explode to be a 1,000-yard receiver next year? And honestly speaking, none of that does. And Toney, I think, from the eye test, looks the part. So you have a few interesting things going on with Toney that make him extremely hard to predict. One is that he has an injury history. 2 is that he has yet to show he can be a highly productive player in the NFL. And then 3rd is his production last year wasn't that great. But then you have that last piece where the eye test looks really good. So Toney is he's a mixed bag. He's hard to predict. And I am not going to go with the numbers on Toney completely. Because if I went by the numbers, he would be around 400, 500 yards receiving next year if he stayed healthy. I'm going to go with the eye test and then temper it a bit with the numbers. So the eye test says Toney is a number 1 wide receiver in the NFL. Temper that with some of the numbers and the injury history that he's had. I am predicting Kadarius Toney to have 750 yards receiving next year and 6 touchdowns. I have that number probably low for a lot of you. And the reason for that is because the injuries and the lack of production over his first 2 years in the NFL. That doesn't mean that can't change. In fact, I love Toney's game. I love watching him play. This is not me saying I don't like Toney. In fact, I think that Toney has the best shot to be the wide receiver 1 on the Chiefs, and I think he is the player who has the best shot to get 1,000 yards receiving for the Chiefs next year, other than Kelsey. And so in no way do I hate Toney. What I'm saying is I'm kind of dousing some realism in terms of both his injury history and his production so far in the NFL. So that's what I've got for Toney. Go ahead and blast me in the comments if you want to, but I've got him at 750 yards receiving next year with 6 touchdowns. Moving on, we have Sky Moore. So Sky Moore, some of the comments I had last week thought that Sky Moore was going to be the best receiver on the Chiefs next year, the most productive receiver on the Chiefs. And aside from Richie James, Sky Moore was the most productive college receiver, or is the most productive college receiver that the Chiefs have on their roster. And first, I forgot to subtract Toney's 750, so we'll do that. Oh, you gotta be kidding me. Okay, now we've got 1,400 yards left. So this number is dropping quickly that Patrick Mahomes has left to throw to these wide receivers. But back to Sky Moore. His first season with the Chiefs, he had about 250 yards and no touchdowns in the regular season in 16 games. So he was really underperformed based on what he did in college. And I think Sky Moore is in a prime position to have a jump from his production last year. I don't think it'll be a tremendous jump, but I do think he'll have a jump in production. And I'm predicting Sky Moore to continue progressing in the NFL. And I'm predicting he will have 500 yards receiving and 4 touchdowns. So some of you might have wanted Sky Moore to, be a 1,000-yard receiver. I don't see that happening. I'm saying 500 yards. He makes a big jump from his season last year, doubles his production, continues the upward trajectory. And once again, I don't hate Sky Moore. I really like Sky Moore. I like what he brings to the Chiefs. But have to temper expectations, especially whenever the Chiefs have so many possible wide receivers that contribute. And so now if you deduct the 500 yards for Sky Moore, you're left with 900 yards. So there's not a lot of yards to go around based on Mahomes' average. I mean, we've given MVS 650 yards, Tony 750 yards, Sky Moore 500 yards, and you're left with under 1,000 yards receiving for the remaining receivers on the Chiefs team. And so it's hard for this group to have a player that breaks through. It used to be Tyreek Hill would just get, over 50% of the wide receiver targets. That's not going to happen with this group. This is going to be death by committee at the wide receiver position. There's going to be so many guys to throw the ball to, and I think that dynamic is going to help the Chiefs. And I'll talk about that towards the end of the video. But moving on, next we have Richie James. Remember, Richie James is the player that I kind of think is the Chiefs' dark horse candidate to really produce the wide receiver position. He's had steady growth throughout his career, going from the 49ers to the Giants. Now he's on the Chiefs. He was a really productive player in college, the fourth most productive player in college in the last 10 years for players that went to the NFL. He was drafted in the 7th round. And so, I really like what Richie James can do. He had 569 yards receiving with the Giants last year. But with this Chiefs loaded wide receiver room, I have him predicted at 300 yards receiving and 2 touchdowns. So Richie James takes a step back from what he did last year with the Giants, and this is because there's so many mouths to feed on this Chiefs offense. There's so many guys that need to be throwing the ball, or that can be throwing the ball, that can get open. And so Richie James kind of falls into that group. He's going to be a contributor. He's going to make plays for the Chiefs. And this is one player that I really had a hard time giving him only 300 yards. I think it's totally possible that he has, 500 yards receiving next year. But if we go to give him 300 yards, that leaves us 600 yards receiving for, 3 other Chiefs receivers. And one of these receivers I really like, and that is Rashee Rice. So I think Rashee Rice has an impact on the Chiefs day one. I really like this college tape. I like this college statistics. He has a good mixture of production and athleticism. He has good size. There's just a ton of things to like about Rashee Rice. And while, the average drop for college receivers going from, college to their rookie season, that average drop in production is around, for a second rounder, is around 38%, 40%. And so based on his statistics throughout his average in college, that would mean that he would be about a 750 yard receiver in the NFL. Well, guess what? I don't have 700 yards to give him. So I'm going to temper my expectations with Rashee Rice a little bit. I don't want to do this, but I'm going to. And I'm going to put Rashee Rice at 500 yards and 4 touchdowns for the Chiefs. So I think he fills a role. I think the reason why a lot of these wide receiver numbers are distributed is because of the potential for Tony getting hurt. I think other players are going to step up, and they're going to put up good numbers for the Chiefs. But if Rashee Rice gets 500 yards, that leaves us with only 100 yards left to hand out based on Mahomes' average. And that brings us on to a major wild card for the Chiefs and Justin Ross. And Justin Ross, I think, given his injury history, he's going to get his toes dipped in the water. He's just going to get his feet wet, get him a little bit acclimated to the Chiefs offense. He's not going to be put in a major role, even though, he'll look the part. He'll look like he could be a potential, a playmaker in the NFL. But because of his injury history, the Chiefs are going to take it super conservative, super slow with him. That's traditional Andy Reid. That's what he does. And he's only going to have 100 yards receiving and 1 touchdown next season. So that'll leave us with 0 yards. But wait, there's more. It's almost like I'm in an infomercial because, the Chiefs have one more wide receiver who I think makes a team, and has some yardage next year, and that's Justin Watson. So Justin Watson, he had about 350 yards receiving for the Chiefs last year, which was more than I thought it was. So he played a role, and I think he's going to play a very small role for the Chiefs next year. And, I have Justin Watson. I'm predicting him at 150 yards receiving with 1 touchdown, a drop from last year. The Chiefs signed him to a 2-year deal, so they must like what he brings to the table. Maybe he has some experience that the team feels he can share with the younger wide receivers. Maybe he's a good player coach. And I can't remember if Justin Watson, played a major role on special teams, but I thought that 2-year deal was interesting. But I want to go back to the Chiefs' wide receiver by committee approach. And this is a unique wide receiver group because I feel like their floor is pretty high and their ceiling is very high as well. This is a wide receiver group where I believe the number one wide receiver can have some problems. The number one wide receiver is not going to be able to easily beat the average or the above average number one cornerback. And that's true for a lot of NFL teams. But what this team has that a lot of other teams don't have is that their third and fourth wide receiver they'll literally be able to beat the brakes off of, the average third or fourth defensive back that they'll be seeing. So I would not play man coverage very much against this Chiefs passing attack. And that leads to bad things because Mahomes versus the zone is pretty dang good. So this is a wide receiver by committee group that Andy Reid has deployed a lot throughout his tenure in the NFL. If you remember back to his days with the Eagles, he had guys like Todd Pinkston being their leading wide receiver. And Todd Pinkston, I think I was more stout than he was, and I'm not that big of a guy. I think he was about 6 foot, 170 pounds, something like that. And so Andy Reid has had a lot of years where he didn't have, elite primo wide receivers on the team. Go back to the year where he won a whole bunch of games with Alex Smith without throwing a single touchdown pass to wide receivers. So this is, a wide receiver group that I really like because they have a lot of potential and they have a lot of, ways to mix and match these players. And defenses, just like last year, even more so than last year, are not going to have a strong idea of how to defend this team. Because there's going to be a lot of distribution to the wide receiver group. There's going to be a lot of different wide receivers that step up, especially if my predictions pan out. And, I predicted Justin Watson to have 150 yards receiving, so that put us at negative 150. So I'm over projecting Mahomes' wide receiver numbers, and maybe I shouldn't have done that. But to recap, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, 650 yards, 4 touchdowns. Kadarius Toney, 750 yards, 6 touchdowns. Sky Moore, 500 yards, 4 touchdowns. Richie James, 300 yards, 2 touchdowns. Rashee Rice, 500 yards, 4 touchdowns. Justin Ross, 100 yards, 1 touchdown. Justin Watson, 150 yards, 1 touchdown. And you could see how difficult it is to give these players, a lot of receiving yards based on what Mahomes is going to be able to deliver next season. But I want you to let me know in the comments. I have a feeling I'm going to get blasted for this. Let me know if you hate me. Let me know if you don't hate me. Let me know if you love the predictions. Keep me honest. I appreciate everyone that told me their predictions last week. I did take those into account. And, this is an extremely difficult group to predict. So we'll see how well I do. And hopefully, someone from this group steps up and fills that wide receiver 1 role. Hopefully, Rashee Rice and Sky Moore come in and, build upon, especially Sky Moore, build upon what they've done in the past. And hopefully Kadarius stays healthy. I think if Toney stays healthy, then that 750 number becomes a lot different. But we'll see what happens. Like I said, let me know in the comments. That's all I got. It was a lot of fun working on these predictions, sharing, my methods with you all. And I hope you guys kind of have a good look at behind the scenes how these things are done or how I do them. But with that, that's it. This is Gary signing out. Glad to see you. Take it easy. Let's go, Chiefs. We're inching closer to training camp. It's going to be awesome.
Thanks for watching this video from the team at RGR Football. Click these videos to see more and subscribe to RGR Football.